Good afternoon, everyone. I'm just going to give it a couple minutes, let people jump on, and then we'll go ahead and get started. All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining today for our webinar on protecting your business or nonprofit in today's world. My name is Mary Myers. I'm the Director of Business Development at the Bexar County EDC. This webinar is being put on by the Bexar County EDC and also in partnership with the Chamber, who helped us market the webinar. So we have four great panelists with us here today. Human resource expert Robin Chapekis, I'm sorry, I probably butchered that, with SVELTE HR. Our financial institution expert Brian Donnelly with Superior National Bank. Law enforcement expert Detective Sergeant Matt Lequia with the Michigan State Police. And attorney Michael Melif with, I just pronounced this correctly, Mavacy. Can you pronounce it for me, Michael? I'm going to say it wrong, and I just said it correctly.
Help you with Mavacy.
Mavacy, thank you. So each of them will be giving a presentation on their expertise, and then at the end we'll do a Q&A. So feel free to submit your questions throughout the webinar in the question box, and then we'll get to those then. So I am going to, Robin is going to kick us off, but Robin is the founder and principal consultant for SVELTE HR. She holds a Master's of Science in Human Resources and Organizational Development and a graduate certificate in nonprofit management from Eastern Michigan University. So with that, Robin, I will hand it over to you.
I have to find the unmute. I should know where it is by now, right? Thank you. And thank you for inviting me, Mary, and nice to see my fellow panelists. So protecting your business or your nonprofit in today's world, big topic, but we're going to focus on the embezzlement factors of it. Could you advance, please? Thank you. So from an HR perspective, we're going to talk about some simultaneous approaches. The reactive approach and the proactive approach. So reactive meaning literally, oh no, something has happened and we need to do something about it. And then the proactive approach, meaning let's not, oh no, let's proactively do something about things before they could potentially happen. Next slide, please. So in the reactive approach, if we are in a situation where we find, oh no, something has happened, like maybe there was an audit and we noticed there were some dollars missing from different places, we are going to take a look at who it could potentially be, find an employee that may have access to those dollars or incentive for funneling away those dollars. And we are going to suspend that employee with or without pay, depending on what your policies are. And I would actually refer to Michael, the attorney, about how to best handle that. I probably will say that multiple times. Just refer to your attorney, ask your attorney. But you're going to suspend that employee. Not a good idea to terminate right away because they may or may not have actually done the action. You know, it could be something different, or something that we don't understand quite yet. So we're going to suspend, and then we're going to complete an investigation. So the investigation is pretty much like any other human resource investigation into something that happens in your organization. For any interviews that happen, including with the alleged person, we would have a third person in the room. Could be your attorney, could be another HR person. You do want to make sure that you allow the opportunity for any union representation if your employees have a union in place. You want to allow for a union rep to be in the room with the person if they're a union member. You're going to want to document well those interviews and the findings. Like, again, attorney will say if you didn't write it down, it didn't happen. And we can tell the difference between if you wrote it down right now and if you wrote it down 2 weeks from now. So make sure that you're documenting, document. And you're also going to be gathering other information. This may include other documents such as audit statements or financial statements, or, you know, files from computers, hard drives, email. Sometimes, you know, you need to get IT involved and find any back and forth email communication that may back up your position. Again, financial statements, and then any transaction reports. So that AP and AR, you're going to want to take a look through those and, you know, look for anything suspicious and fishy. You're also going to have your witnesses write their own statement. So anyone that you interview, make sure you have them also provide a written statement of, you know, their involvement in any scenario, as well as, you know, any perceptions that they may have about that scenario. So that's the investigation. Simultaneously, you are going to be calling in the help. You are not alone. You do not need to be alone in this situation. Give a call to your insurance. Many businesses have insurance, and you may find that theft could fall under business personal property if business owned items were stolen, or crime coverage if funds were stolen potentially by an outside party, or there are other ways that insurance could cover those things, but you definitely want to ask your insurance what your coverage is and what information they are going to need when you go to file a claim. You're also going to call up your buddy Michael, who is going to be your closest friend. You're going to be on a very first name friendly basis with that employment law attorney, understanding the steps you should be taking, things you should not be doing, which is as important as things that you should be doing. You're going to be relying on that person for guidance throughout and support throughout, as well as, you know, again, advising, same as insurance would advise, what are the things that I'm going to need to make a case, make a claim. And then potentially law enforcement. This is when you would call Matt and ask Matt, you know, hey, we have this scenario that's happening. What information do you need in order for us to potentially in the future file, you know, charges against someone? If it's a super large amount, you're definitely going to want to be calling in law enforcement earlier than later. So this is your starting of your reactive process. Next slide. So if you have a suspected employee that's found at fault, you are going to terminate that employee, I would hope. Final paycheck, you know, you might be angry. You might think, oh, I'll get him back. You know, I'll take money out of their final paycheck. If it was a small amount, they owe me because they did this. Please don't do that. That's very illegal to do that. I'm sure Michael could talk to that, but leave that final paycheck alone. Just clean break, treat it like any other employee separation. Get what they need to get on that final paycheck. If they signed an agreement at, you know, beginning of employment saying these are the items that can be deducted from final paycheck, for example, maybe they didn't return a laptop and that's a deduction out of their final paycheck. Anything that has already been agreed upon and written, carry on with that process and procedure for the final paycheck, but please don't be angry on the final paycheck. And then if you are going to pursue legal charges, that's again where you would be calling Matt and asking Matt how to proceed there. But I would wait until after termination in order to do that. So that's the basics of our reaction. If you find yourself in the oh no situation. Next slide. Thank you. So in order to preemptively sort of ward off any situations like this that might occur, we're going to look at systems, process, and people, and how to implement some systems, some processes, and hire people that will hopefully not put you in these situations. Next slide, please. So systems. Systems are management ways of, air quoting, controlling the workforce and their behaviors. So shared values is a system of management control. If your organization has well-established, well-communicated, and well demonstrated by senior leadership shared values, things like integrity and trustworthiness and commitment, those kinds of things, if those are within your shared values, there's going to be a higher chance that people who already have those values are going to be attracted to your organization and are going to continue to demonstrate and use those values in their day-to-day work, therefore reducing your liability of embezzlement or theft. So establish a great system of shared values and then use it. Communication, also a system of management control, is how you communicate. It needs to be two-way, it needs to be frequent and transparent. So frequent communication of what's going on in the organization, what are the goals, what's the strategic plan, again, what are those shared values, very, very frequent and very, very transparent. I would ask folks if they have performance management systems and if their shared values are communicated through those performance management systems, but that's a different kind of webinar, so we'll leave that question for you to mull over. And then another system could be physical surveillance. So physical and digital surveillance could be cameras, depending on what your business is doing. Are you selling? Are you a bank? Are you a law office? Are you some type of other firm? Do you have public public coming through your doors frequently? Make sure you look at the legalities around surveillance, but physical surveillance is a way to deter, as well as digital surveillance. How has your IT set up? How do we monitor what employees are doing online via email, those kinds of things. For anywhere where there's money handled, are there cameras there? Can there be cameras there? Again, there are some legal ramifications around that. You have to identify that people are being recorded and whatnot. So next one, policies. What policies are in place regarding theft? Do you have an anti-theft policy in your employee handbook? Do you have a confidentiality policy in your employee handbook? Do you have some IT controls, such as, you cannot bring in your personal USB device and plug it into a firm computer? These are all controls that can be used to deter and deflect a potential embezzlement situation. And then again, liability. All I'm going to say is you have liability insurance, right? If you don't, that's a good phone call to make maybe tomorrow, is double check that liability insurance and ensure that you have some protections for your business for theft and embezzlement. Next slide, please. Thank you. So some processes that you can put into place to be proactive in, again, deterring. Separation is a big one, separation of duties. So, when you think about how your accounts receivable, accounts payable, your tellers, how do they receive and give out money, and what kinds of systems are in place there in order for there to be two different people looking at those transactions. Somebody's recording a transaction versus someone actually doing the paying of the transaction versus someone else doing the receiving of the transaction. Is there a way in your established accounting systems or any other software systems where one person is providing input and a second person is providing approval of that input? These are ways to separate out those duties so there are day-to-day, or maybe not day-to-day, but as frequent as possible, check on the money flow and how is money coming in and going out, and is there more than one person taking a look at that and seeing that. I've a board member. I'm the president for UPHRA, and one of my board members is the CFO for a banking system, and she requires time off for all of her employees, at least a week. So 5 full days of time off on a rotation schedule, so that there is a breakup of those duties and someone else is performing them. So there can be some check happening while that person is away. And anything unusual could be identified during that time. I said that's a great solution for a lot of ways. You get someone on vacation and you get to double check. Also inventory, so inventory management. What controls do you have for any hard goods? Are you doing an inventory count on a regular basis, whether it be annually if you have many small items like a sporting goods store, or is it, more frequent if you have a t-shirt shop and you're checking every week how many items are on your shelving? Just doing that inventory control to keep track of actual hard goods that are in your store. And then of course, audit. Audit's an ideal process control. If you're not auditing, please start. I'm not going to advise on frequency or how or third party or internal. Those are decisions that can be made within an organization, but auditing is vital for every organization, no matter what you're doing. Auditing your financials, auditing even your policies and procedures, even your HR, paperwork. Doing those types of audits on a fairly regular basis is always a good idea. Next slide, please. Thank you. So our last section about being proactive is about people. People are they're our greatest asset and our greatest liability. We bring people in an organization to, help us achieve our strategic objectives and help us achieve our day-to-day work. They're also our biggest liability. It's a person walking out the door with the dollars that have disappeared. It's a person, that in that scenario, it's not a machine usually. And even if it is a machine, there's often a person behind it. So having the right people in your organization can help, again, to deter any of those things. So if you're looking at the people that you have and looking at hiring, you're going to want to take a look at that selection process. How are you selecting the people that you're bringing into your organization? I'm going to go back to shared values. Are those shared values part of that selection process? Are you doing something to assess, gee, this person aligns with our shared values, or gee, the behaviors that they say they have demonstrated in the past do not align with our shared values, and maybe we should take a pass on that applicant. So take a look at that selection process. Pre-employment screenings. I think we've flipped through slides quickly, and I think Michael had some stuff about pre-employment, so I'm not going to touch on this, but are you doing them? Are you doing background checks? How in depth are you going? It depends on the kind of organization you have. Banking is going to be a little bit more in depth than, maybe a t-shirt shop, but are you doing them, and do you need to, and how in depth do you need to go? And then onboarding. So onboarding, some organizations really get angry at me when I say it's assimilating someone into your organization, but it really is. It's assimilating someone into your organization so that they have an understanding of your strategic objectives, your shared values, talk about them again, as well as the culture and the expectations of performance and behavior within that organization. Setting those expectations early and often is going to help you again and again and again in the long run. And it's almost an insurance policy, really. You're also going to want to make sure that you have some sort of reporting mechanism. Is there a third-party phone number that someone can call if they notice, some suspicious behavior of a coworker? Is it the HR team that they're calling? And if they're not comfortable with the HR team, is it maybe they're calling Matt? Maybe they're calling law enforcement saying, "Hey, I've been noticing this suspicious thing." But so how does that work, and how does that information then get back into the organization so that action can be taken? I would think, hopefully, Brian, that you could speak to, maybe there's some banking reporting mechanism that I'm not aware of. I've never worked in banking, but I've worked in organizations where there was an ethics hotline that literally you could call and say, this is happening and I'm not comfortable with it. And then performance feedback. Performance feedback is so, so important in every situation. And it's not just about the feedback, it's about the whole process of performance and setting the expectations, setting the understanding of, not only the things that employees are meant to be doing in their day-to-day jobs, but also the how and the behaviors that you want to see demonstrated that absolutely should be aligning with those shared values. And if you're not seeing those behaviors that are aligning with those shared values, how are you giving that feedback to the employees? And are you giving that feedback to employees? You might be able to, again, proactively stop a situation if you're noticing behaviors that are out of alignment with your shared values, and be able to stop something or notice something before it becomes a larger issue. That's all I have. Thank you, Mary.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Robin. I really like the idea of breaking up the duties by giving time off. It's unique and you get some time off. So that's great.
Exactly. It's a win-win.
Yeah. So up next, we have Brian Donnelly with Superior National Bank. Brian has worked for nearly 25 years in all areas of financial services and is a member of the leadership team at Superior National Bank. As SVP Retail and Deposit Banking Director, Brian has oversights of Superior National Bank's branch network and deposit products. Brian is passionate about fighting fraud and excited to talk to the group about tips you can take to protect your organization. So, Brian, I'll hand it over to you.
Hello, and thanks for having me. So I'm the banker, and banks are still in the business of protecting money. So we're going to talk a little bit about fraud. Actually, I'll probably talk a lot about fraud, and then I'll talk a little bit about internal controls, specifically as they pertain to protecting your banking relationship as it relates to your employees. So you can go to the first slide. So wire fraud is the first type of fraud that I'm going to talk about. And something I should say is all forms of fraud that we deal with are escalating. They're escalating coming out of the pandemic, but it seems like every form of fraud that we're fighting is on the rise. And wire fraud it's not the most frequent type of fraud that we see, but it's usually the largest dollar values. And it's the most painful because once a wire is sent, you can't get it back. Usually what a wire fraud attack looks like is there's a bad actor that's impersonating an authorized signer on your account, and they're reaching out to the bank, often by email, to try to convince the bank to send out a wire. And this is usually part of a sophisticated long-term attack. Usually the email is compromised, and they've been monitoring that email. So they have a lot of information about information that's being exchanged within the company. I saw a particular wire fraud attack where the bad actor sent a email from the director of a municipality to the treasurer, referencing an actual project that was in place, real details about the project, but they used wire information that would have benefited them, and they were very fortunate that they caught that. So wire fraud is painful, but there are a couple of tips that I can share with you to help protect your organization from wire fraud. One is to establish a wire agreement with any financial institutions that you work with. A wire fraud agreement is gonna contain information about the types of wires you're going to send. So if you send international wires, if you want to set a limit on the size of wires that you would send, the people that are authorized to send wires. So maybe not all the signers on a checking account are authorized to send wires. But most importantly, usually a wire agreement will allow you to set a PIN, so that if you are ever trying to reach out to a bank by phone, that specific PIN number that needs to be provided to authorize that wire. Something that's making us really nervous in banking right now is the rise of deep fakes, where somebody can actually impersonate somebody's voice and use technology, AI technology, to convince us that, oh, I know this person's voice. If I recognize their voice, I could potentially share information with them or authorize a transaction. That's not even safe these days. You know, if my own brother called me, I would have to be concerned about technology being used to impersonate his voice. So, you know, in that same context, just letting your bank know what to expect. If you remember opening your business accounts, your bank asks you some kind of probing questions about the way that you're going to transact. Are you going to use ACH transactions? How much cash do you expect? And they'll ask you questions about your expected wire usage. And that information is collected for your own protection. If your bank knows what to expect out of you, we use technology in the background to monitor things that are out of line or out of the expected for your organization. And we can use that, the responses to those kinds of questions to help protect your organization. We use, banks have lots of technology in the background that we're trying to spot these instances of fraud, but we need to feed information into the system for them to be effective. Kind of align with the story that I told you. It's really, really important. Email is a dangerous tool when it comes to basically every kind of fraud, because you know, we're all kind of familiar with the kinds of ransomware attacks where somebody's clicked on a link and now somebody's monitoring details that are being shared on a computer. That's where sharing anything over email, financial details over email, can be dangerous. And then lastly, most banks will offer you the ability to originate wires and some other transactions yourself through your online banking, as opposed to filling out a form or sending an email or calling in. And that's much, much safer. Most fraud happens as a result of some sort of an intercept. Some bad actor has gotten in between the company or the organization and their bank, and there's been an interception of information. Using your online banking portal, which is a secure banking portal, to self-originate either wires or ACH transactions is much safer than emailing or even calling your institution to ask to have a wire sent. You can go to the next slide. So this is the hot topic in banking right now: check and mail fraud, and it's not always the biggest dollar amounts, but it's definitely the most frequent thing that we're seeing. And I think people have this thought in their mind that a lot of fraud is digital, and it's not. Mail fraud and check fraud are kind of synonymous, and it's organized crime. And what we're seeing is organized criminals are stealing mail. They'll break into the blue boxes in bigger cities, steal the money, or steal the mail out of there, looking for checks that they can either sell or that they can use to try to defraud the recipients or the makers of those checks. And that looks, there's two different ways that looks. One would be a counterfeit check, where if you think about, I mean, in my mind, checks are kind of a ridiculous instrument. You think about the information that's on a check. You got your account number, your routing number, your name, a copy of your signature. There's a lot of information on a check. So that's a vulnerable instrument. And once a fraudster has that, they can create a counterfeit check and try to present it against your account. Once that happens, it's very painful. You usually have to shut down your checking account, and you can imagine all the pain that goes with that. So that's painful. And sometimes what they'll do is they'll alter the check. So specifically, they'll alter the amount or the payee of the check, often to another victim. So a lot of times you're probably thinking, well, if somebody changes the name that's on the check, well, we just got to go find that person and we can arrest them. Very often, once law enforcement finds that person, they've been a victim of another fraud scheme, and they've already sent that money on to the organized criminals. There are some things that we can do to protect ourselves from check fraud as well. It's really important to review your items, and banks offer a tool for businesses called Positive Pay, which specifically allows you for both ACH and for checks, to review your daily checks that have been presented against your account and authorize the items that you do in fact want to be paid. So that would give you an opportunity that if you saw an item that you didn't create that check, that you could say don't pay that check. So that's a tool that some businesses subscribe to. That helps them fight fraud. Like I said, that's available both for check and for ACH. And it's particularly important that you review the payee. The biggest kind of fraud that we're seeing right now is a real check with a real dollar amount, with a real check number. They take the check and they leave everything the same except for the payee. So if you think about that, when you're reconciling your checkbook, well, you expected that check number to clear in that dollar amount. So you're probably not, it's not going to raise a red flag for you. What usually happens is you get a call from a supplier or a vendor 2 months later saying, hey, you know, you're 60 days late on that payment, and you say, no, I made that payment, that check cleared. But then you dive deeper and you look and you say, wait, that was made to this individual and not my vendor. So that it's really important to review your accounts. And I would encourage you to consider other modes of payment as well. So if you have bill pay and you use bill pay, often that's going to create a check that's going to be mailed out to your vendor or whoever you're paying, but it doesn't have your information on it. It has a bank routing and account number, and generally speaking, if that check is compromised, it's not going to be your problem. It's going to be the bank's problem. So bill pay is a little bit more secure way to do that. Usually there's limits on that. And then if you have large volumes, you might want to consider ACH. Nothing is without risk, but self-originated ACH through your online banking can cut some of that opportunity for intercept out of the equation, which is good. Other just basic tips: avoid leaving mail in an unsecure box on either end. So don't leave your incoming mail sitting in your mailbox for long. And if you're sending out a lot of checks, you might want to think about taking those checks straight to the post office as opposed to putting them in an unsecure box outside of your business. And lastly, with all these kinds of frauds, report them promptly, because you have rights as a business or organization, and if you report these attacks early, that you've had a fraud hit on your account, you're more likely to be made whole on that attack. You can go to the next slide. Debit card fraud with businesses, it's not something that we see a lot more on the consumer front than we do on the business front on this, but it is something that we should talk about. A lot of the same themes. Monitor your accounts. If you find fraud on your debit card and you let your bank know quickly, you're a lot more likely to be made whole. Most banks offer a big variety of transaction alerts where you can say, please send me a text message or an email if there's an item that clears my account for more than $500 or whatever it is, and all other different kinds of alerts. Your bank probably has some protection where they're watching your debit card for usage outside of the areas that they use, or outside of the characteristics of your normal usage. So you might get a message from your bank sometimes saying that this is a fraud alert. But be careful with that, because sometimes that's fraud. What that looks like is you get a fraud alert and they'll want you to reach out to them, and then they're going to ask you to provide them information. So in no situation do you ever want to provide debit card or really any other bank information in response to any sort of unsolicited phone or email contact. That's where a lot of debit card fraud starts. You can go to the next slide. And Robin talked about this concept, so this is kind of moving into internal controls. Dual control is a banking concept where we have two individuals that are working together on the same process for cash handling, opening safes, and things like this. But it's something that you can certainly apply in your organization as well. Some great examples of how that would work with your banking is maybe not having the same individuals authorized to both print and sign a check. So you can usually authorize certain users to be able to print checks out of your bookkeeping software. You might not want to have them be the same as folks that can sign the checks. You can require dual signature on checks if you want, but that's kind of an internal control, because if you think about it, if your policy is you require two checks, two signatures, and they go out to eat and they buy food with a check signed by one person, that restaurant doesn't know that there's supposed to be two signatures, so that's not really going to stop anything. But it is something that you can use as an internal control. Robin talks a lot about policy. You can make that a policy so that if anybody decides to sign a check individually, they've broken policy and you can talk to them about it. Another big thing that I think is important is to review your signers, and a big thing is the online banking controls. When people leave, a lot of times we change the signers on the business accounts, but we forget that they had online access to view different things, and that's the part that we see missed a lot. So it's really important to go back and check on what kinds of authorizations did that person have to access your financial world. On other kinds of transactions, so I talked a little bit about self-originating wire or ACH transactions. Most banks allow for you internally to say, we don't just want one person to authorize those transactions. We want two people to authorize those transactions. So that's another internal control that you can use to protect your banking. You can go to the next slide. Just high-level stuff, background checks. Robin touched on this. Having safe people in your business starts at the hiring desk. In banking, we always do credit checks. People that are struggling from a credit standpoint sometimes are in a financially strapped position, and there's some correlation that people that are in a tough spot might be pressured into doing something that they shouldn't do. External audits are really key, especially if there's any nonprofit organizations that are participating today. It's really great to have a professional review your organization and make sure that on a large scale no money has gone missing. It's also key for boards of directors to limit their liability or responsibility around any sort of embezzlement. Be particularly careful with gift cards and petty cash. Anything that doesn't have a paper trail is particularly vulnerable. A lot of chambers have like a chamber cash kind of program and things like that. A lot of businesses will maintain gift cards to give out as opposed to bonuses that go through payroll. Just be cautious with that, because with no paper trail, that's a vulnerability right there. And I don't know if Mike's going to go into this, but the one last comment I'll make is having a written operating agreement. Sometimes the conversation that we at a bank have is we have a business owner come to us and say, all the money is gone from our checking accounts. My partner pulled all the capital out of the bank. I didn't think that they could do that. If you've got joint people on a checking account, I think it's really important that they have a great agreement between them so that they know what is supposed to happen with the financial assets business. I think that's all that I've got. So thank you everybody for your time.
Thanks, Brian. I like the note on making sure you check your checks, because I don't do that when I write my checks. I just assume like, oh yeah, they're cashed by who they should be. They came out of my account. So that's a really good reminder. So Thank you for that. Up next, we have Matt Lequia, Detective Sergeant. Matt began his career in law enforcement when attending NMU's Regional Police Academy in 2009. He worked for Chocolate Township Police Department and NMU Public Safety before joining the Michigan State Police in 2012. He began his career with MSP at the Wakefield Post, where he later transferred to the Negaunee Post. He was a detective trooper on the UP's substance enforcement team for 5 years prior to being promoted to detective sergeant. And as a detective sergeant at the post, he assists the troopers with local agencies with a variety of investigations. So thanks, Matt. I'll hand it over to you.
All right, perfect. Like I said, I've got some experience here with the embezzlements and stuff like that. And to touch on Brian, there's a lot that goes on beyond just an embezzlement. There can be these various forms of fraud that can also affect your business. You can go ahead, go to the next slide here. I'm sure I'm going to be kind of brief. Robin and Brian did a great job of kind of covering a lot of the stuff. I guess I'm going to be similarly covering here in the prevention. Obviously a big thing for is thorough background checks, like Brian was saying with the financial situations and looking into credit checks and stuff like that. A big thing I will say is contacting prior employers. What I have seen in the past with a lot of embezzlements, some that I've worked, is you have an employee, they get caught, they agree to pay the money back, they move on, nothing criminal happens because the business is able to recover what they lost. And then this employee just kind of goes around bouncing around working. Well, if you do your due diligence usually and talk to these prior employers, hopefully they're going to be at least honest with you and tell that they had some sort of issue laying on the background. That's just what I've seen happen in a lot of these cases. Obviously, having a separate accounting, having somebody going through your books, external audits are going to be huge in your prevention and picking up on stuff. Communication is huge with talking with your employees, kind of finding out. I'm not saying you want to go down the rumor mill, but if somebody's talking about somebody having issues at work and stuff like that, it's good to keep in your mind. And then all of a sudden you start noticing that, money's going out a certain way or something. You're noticing these odd behaviors and stuff at work and stuff isn't adding up. Obviously that's we call it a clue. That would be very valuable in discussing that with law enforcement and stuff like that, or following up on these. The big thing is obviously don't be naive, but you also got to be vigilant. You got to have that balance. You don't want to accuse every single employee that works for you after you're going to have no employees. Nobody's going to enjoy working there. But you also have to understand how embezzlement, these different frauds can affect your business. Go ahead to the next slide. So criminal investigations, obviously kind of covered here a little bit. If you believe you've got some sort of crime going on with your business, whether it's embezzlement or fraud. This is coming from the law enforcement side. I don't recommend confronting them right away if you can. Obviously, it's a little nicer this is coming from law enforcement side, to be able to interview that person before they know what's going to happen. I mean, we've done it where we've interviewed the employee, and then immediately after we're done with our interview, the employer comes in and says, hey, you're on administrative leave or you're terminated, depending on the facts of the circumstances around the investigation. It is obviously, from my end on law enforcement, it's awesome to catch people red-handed, whether that's we stop them as they're leaving the business that day and they have the actual cash in hand. If they're stealing cash from a business, that's amazing evidence to have to help prosecute them. A big thing with embezzlements is a lot of times you might notice this one little thing, but that's where these external audits and looking into things, it can progress. I mean, obviously we've had embezzlements. It looks like you're missing $10,000, and the next thing you know, you start spinning up, and this employee's been working for 7 years, and then you start adding stuff up and go back and obviously increase in value. And it might not just be one thing of like embezzlement as in they're actually stealing the money. It might be they're using company products or company stuff for their own gain. There's obviously a lot of different ways that it can go. Go ahead to the next slide. So this is just the embezzlement statute in Michigan. This is kind of the nuts and bolts, bare bones statute of what is defined as embezzlement. There's various severities for the punishment. There's up to 1,000. This is the 1,000 to 20,000. There's 20,000 or more. Obviously, the more money, the more serious the offense. And then, like I said, you just kind of fill in the blanks here, whatever being a agent, servant, employee, nonprofit, corporations or charitable organization did, and then fraudulently dispose of, convert to his or her own use, take in secret with the intent to convert to his or her own use. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that can happen. Now, when you start talking about embezzlements and frauds and stuff like that, there's also obviously different charges for that stuff as well. So I just wanted to kind of touch on that briefly. Go ahead and do the next slide. What law enforcement will need from you is obviously information on whoever you suspect. Obviously names so we can do our checks, phone numbers and emails are obviously big for us because those are basically linked. When you talk about dual authentication and stuff like that, a lot of that is connected. So if you have an employee that is going about doing something illegal, I mean, at some point they're converting this money. They could be using a banking app through their phone. I mean, it could be cash. It could be using emails and setting up fictitious accounts. That's all the stuff that we're interested in. And then obviously banking institution information that we can get from the nonprofit. For the employee is nice to know what banks if we have an idea of where we can start looking at maybe some of this lost money is and where it's at. Obviously the names of employees who work with the suspect. I mean, in a lot of these cases, there's some, nobody wants to be a rumor spreader, but there's something that's going on there that they might have noticed, some oddities. That's obviously nice. We're going to interview those employees. Obviously access to the financial banking records and audits, stuff like that. So we can see where this fraud or embezzlement started. So you got that, like I said, a vantage point of where we can start our investigation, kind of figure out when it started happening. Obviously, we need access to video that helps prove who's in there, especially some of this, when you talk about the electronic wire stuff from a computer. Obviously, you have a camera on the offices, you can see who's at work, who's not. That obviously helps us narrow down who suspects may be. And then obviously key card logs, if you do have that going on in your business. So who's checking into the business and who's checking out. That can be very good for us in trying to narrow down if you don't know who your suspect is. You can go ahead to the next slide. So a couple of embezzlement case examples that I've worked at, just figured it helped to talk about just some of the things. Like Brian said, we've been dealing with a lot of the check fraud stuff lately. There's been a couple different groups. We had a group out of Texas up here in Marquette doing the fraudulent checks, taking them and cashing them. And then we had a group out of Georgia as well that was coming up here. I don't know why they decided to pick Marquette County on a map of the United States, but somehow they ended up here. They're doing everything from taking the checks, copying them, and it's really affecting the businesses because, like Brian was saying earlier, they have it's a check. They're just on these, a lot of them are getting greedy. They're changing the amounts so that they can get more money. So when I worked Target cases back prior in college, I worked for loss prevention for Target. We actually had a case of employee theft there. It was actually one of the main ladies that was in our cash vault going through our cash. What made it hard to catch her is typically if somebody's stealing cash from a register, you can go look at the video of that register and see somebody pocketing cash, something to that effect. It's like one register is affected. Well, what this individual was doing is when they were doing all the money bags from all the registers, they were taking $100 from one bag, putting it in a different bag, taking $100 here, $50 here, $20. So when we looked at when you're looking at your cash for the drawers, everything, some drawers have more money, some drawers have less money. It didn't make any sense. We ended up installing a hidden camera in the actual cash vault. And that's where we were able to actually get the suspect on video. You can see moving cash. It also helped, ended up dropping some cash out in the employee area. Some other employees had come across it. And that's where I talked about earlier with doing background checks, this individual had worked at several businesses and had done the same thing, embezzled, done some sort of fraud, got reimbursed the business for what they believed was stolen, and then just went on to get hired somewhere else. I worked for another one. I recently worked here was with a fire extinguisher company. So like I said, there's many different ways in the embezzlements and the frauds. This helped. The employer actually had a GPS tracker on their vehicle. So this employee was taking the vehicle, driving an hour and a half to his girlfriend's house. He was married, so he's taking a work vehicle over there to go ahead and meet up with his girlfriend. So yes, it's not, you're talking, I don't know, $50, $100 in gas, but if you're doing that multiple times a week, that starts adding up pretty quick here. Then on top of that, he also had where he went to a business, or he took a cash payment. A business paid cash for some work on a extinguishing system. They paid cash, which obviously there's not a whole lot of trail there. Business goes, hey, you're overdue, and business goes, no, we paid cash. Here's a copy of our receipt. Well, what happened is obviously he pocketed the cash and never gave it back to his employer. So there's a lot going on. That's where I said working into it. That's a current criminal case I've got going right now. But like a lot of this stuff, it's just being vigilant. And then if you got it, if there's something that comes up, obviously look into it and contact law enforcement if need be. And then it can be, like I said, it can add up over time on a lot of this stuff, especially with this employee going and driving when he's not technically at work, burning up gas, put miles on cars. I mean, some of this you can't necessarily put a monetary value on right now, but the more you drive a car, I mean, that's eventually going to depreciate in value, kind of thing. So those are a few of the cases that I've worked. But like I said, I would agree with Brian, fraud and stuff like that is going up, especially after post-COVID here, going on in this country. So that's what I've got.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Matt. I'm really curious to see what Michael's going to have to say about what you do with the employer, because you and Robin had different perspectives on that. So
yes, mine's coming from one side, and I totally
Yeah.
understand the other
I
side.
totally get it. Yep. So last but not least, we have Michael Melif. Michael represents innovative and entrepreneurial businesses across a wide mix of legal disciplines. I can't speak today. As a general counsel, tasked with solving problems and creating value. His clientele spans a diverse range of industries, including technology, software, big data, healthcare, manufacturing, publishing, automotive, aerospace, transportation, retail, food and beverage, and construction. So with that, Michael, I'll hand it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you. Nice to meet everyone. I want to thank our host for having us to talk about what most people don't want to talk about. I don't think it's a big deal. Embezzlement actually affects 22% of businesses. So 1 in every 5 people on this call is going to get affected by it. And the average loss from embezzlement, which I was shocked by this number, is $357,650 is the average loss to the business. Not just money, but just the implication on the business for that. So it's a pretty serious issue. As a total side, I did not pay Robin for any of those endorsements, but thank you, Robin. Very nice. And anyone else who made reference to lawyers. I think we all have a story. I could probably spend my whole time just sharing about the experiences I've had with people who you would think were sophisticated, people who you would think have it together, people who do this for a living to protect you, experience it. But for one little hiccup, I would have done it for a large 6-figure number. It happens, and that's what these people do. They make a living of being great at what they do, of trying to hack the system. And so, it's out there. It's something to worry about, and you want to prepare yourself. You want to go to the next slide. The one thing I would say to this is, people say, you should talk to the attorney, about these kind of things. I think it's important to understand if there's embezzlement, there's most likely been a financial implication. In finances numbers, there's going to be a loss, right? So there's some damages that you can measure. And, hopefully you have insurance to be able to touch on that. Hopefully you have insurance to be able to help with that. I think what this is more about, what I want to focus on is what can you do to be preventative? What can you do in advance? Because once it's happened, it's not that it's too late, because you can call your insurance. You can call someone like Matt, law enforcement or any of the agencies that have 3 letters, and you can take legal action. So yes, if you got to me and it happened, we could sue someone if we can figure out who to sue. I could definitely do that. But what I always tell people is if you come to me beforehand, and I think this number is very low, it's probably 5 to 7 times less expensive for us to prevent it from once it happens. And when we're talking about what we're talking about here, it's a lot more than 5 to 7 times more expensive if you take into account the losses. So I think that's an important part. So if we go to the next slide, I'm just going to give you a couple quick kind of tips and tricks. So I think we skipped over one, Mary. Oh, okay, so the first one is clear policies and procedures. And you heard a lot from Robin, you heard a lot from Bill kind of talking about this, but do you have comprehensive policies and procedures that you put in place? Do you change your passwords regularly? Are you putting the types of, I would say kind of like gates in place to protect against it just being laissez-faire and loose? And so having those things in place, I think most of my colleagues on the panel have already kind of talked through these, but really looking at that and you're saying, well, how does a lawyer come into that? You're drafting a policy, you're drafting a procedure. You don't need me. You could put it on a piece of paper and pass it out. When you start dealing with employees, you probably want it to meet certain legal implications or certain legal statutory regulatory requirements. So that's where the lawyer comes in, is can you even enforce it? Can you or can't you do certain things? Do you you immediately fire the person? Do you put them on a PIP? What are the policies and procedures around employment? And human capital is our most valuable asset. So not having the right rules and governance around that only leads to problems. So that's why I led with this. The policy and procedures is a huge part. Again, we talked about this a little bit, so I'll kind of just move on. So on the next slide, what we talk about is background checks. And I think it's such an easy one. And this says background checks, but I'm going to caveat, you have to be careful what you do, but like we all have a public image now. You can see someone's public image. You can see what they're doing. Now, you can't make hiring decisions based on someone's social media channels, but you definitely know what someone is. The other thing I love is personality tests, personality assessments. They're not going to tell you, necessarily if someone's going to embezzle for you or not, but you start to know who they are and if they're a fit in your organization. So, I'm a big believer of hire slow, fire fast. Like, take the time to get to know the person. And if someone doesn't want to let you do a background check on them, it's probably a red flag. Right? I see Robin shaking her head. You don't want to hire him. Don't hire him. But it's if you put the right safeguards and policies and procedures in place, it's kind of like putting a moat up around your business. They can't get in unless you put the drawbridge down. Most people don't build the moat. They don't even have a drawbridge. They don't have a door. They don't have any windows. It's just a free for all. Come and do whatever you want. And so, having kind of some way to vet the person, their characters is big. So for the next one I had was contractual agreements. And I know this got touched on already. Making sure you actually have the right information in the documents that, prohibit against this and, make them put certain things out there, what they can and can't do in the agreements is important. Again, someone who chooses to break the law and steal from you, they're going to break the law, they're going to break your contract. So, just the kind of character they are, but the more that your employment agreements and your vendor agreements start to build that moat for your business, the more protection you have, right? We can put an alarm system in place, so to say, right? And that's what Brian was talking about. It's just this morning, I went to go do a digital deposit and my bank said, can't make this deposit. Well, because I had already deposited the check. I'm like, whoa. Even the bank had the AI, the machine learning to catch those kind of errors that a human being makes. And so that's there. The technology's there and all of our vendors are starting to use it in like the bank and in the finance industry. But being able to start to build your moat with the documentation for what you're doing contractually. Because at the end of the day, if they've done something wrong criminally, you're going to call it Matt and you're going to see what you can do there. The only way I can help protect you is if we have a document that they breached. If we have something they did that tortiously interfered. If we have something they did that would be a legal issue that we can seek remedy for through the judicial system. And having a contract that's airtight is one of the best ways. On the next slide, that is legal action. And, I once got into when I'd represent one of my clients against I won't say the name, but a famous celebrity that you would know. And we were on the phone with them. My client asked the celebrity, well, why'd you do this? And they said, well, you're not in business till you've been sued. And I found that funny. And not that I say everyone should be sued, but the law is there to protect you and help you. It's not something to be scared of. Legal action is something that can be very powerful and very helpful when used appropriately. I've worked in conjunction with local law enforcement when I had a client who did get embezzled from. They were taking out the backdoor inventory. And when we caught it and found it, we had two different lawsuits. We were two different pathways. We had a civil pathway and we had a criminal pathway. And we enforced them both. And when someone gets hit with a lawsuit that they have to defend and they have law enforcement knock on the door, it went pretty well and we got a resolution we wanted. And so, it can be scary. Well, I don't want to be in a lawsuit. I don't want to pay for a lawsuit, but it can be a way to really help push forward and get the results you want. Because at the end of the day, the biggest distinction I would say is when they're, I've said this now twice, when there's an actor, they have done something potentially criminal, which is why you go to law enforcement or an agency. But they've also, if you've done the right parts, commercially, there's commercial litigation, they've breached an agreement or they've breached a handbook or they've done something that can be enforced through the judicial system. And so that's important. I think, when is it appropriate to take legal action versus removing the individual? My lawyers asked me to put a disclaimer, and this should not be construed as legal advice. But it really depends. And what's going to really depend on the circumstances and the facts. I think I already kind of tipped off my hat. I hire slow and fire fast. That's just how I operate and how I tell my clients to operate. But as a business owner, you have to choose what you want to do. You have to choose what your culture is. You have to figure out kind of what makes sense. If there's damages, you can sue, but then you weigh, do you want to be known as the employer who sues? Do you want to get the bad reputation? How much were the damages? There's a lot that goes into analyzing the fact pattern. And so I think the best thing I could say is, preparation is everything. The best way to be prepared is to have a plan and a team. And I will tell you, most of my clients don't take the time to talk about what we just talked about with me or have a plan. Despite the fact that I email them and try to talk to them about it, they usually wait till it's happened, then they call me. Which I'm glad they call me and trust me for that. But had we had the plan in place and had they had the right people from HR to PR to IT to everyone around them on the same page, we probably could have prevented it. So that's what I had. I think I have one more slide. Well, the other thing I kind of alluded to was insurance coverage, and people have already talked in insurance, but understanding your insurance coverage, and as a lawyer, it sounds silly, but I get asked to review people's insurance policies to make sure they actually have adequate coverage. Because I know their business, I know the legal implications. Does your policy actually cover that? And I'm not talking about what is your what is the incident amount and what's the aggregate incident amount. I'm not talking about those dollars numbers. I'm talking about what is the language, what is the exemptions? Do you need a rider? Like, is your cyber coverage actually even cover anything? Like all those things, that's important. We're being recorded, so I'm not going to say too much about insurance, but I would just say you should definitely get your insurance policy reviewed. And it seems like, no, I can't, but it's really important to have that done because you may want to have additional coverage or you may want to take the time to put negotiate with your insurance provider. So with that, those are just a couple quick tips and tricks from kind of a legal perspective that I thought of. And I think, Mary, the next thing we're going to move to is a Q&A, correct?
Yep. Just, I have one question to kick. I know we're over time, so I really appreciate everybody hanging on. And that was a really good overview of everything, Michael. So one question that I had for everybody is just kind of wrap everything up. If you had advice for an organization or a nonprofit or a board member of an organization, what is the number one first thing that you think that they should do to prevent embezzlement or theft in their business? What's that one piece of advice that you would give them?
I think Michael just said it. Hire slow.
You're slow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to say it to be joking, have no employees, but I realize that's our most valuable asset. So I think having the right contractual there's other things I would do, but from where I sit, do you have the right policy and procedure and agreements with your team members and your employees to make sure everyone at least on the same page and you have something that's enforceable?
Brian, Matt, do you guys have any thoughts?
I would say pay attention. Like, in my world, it's reviewing your accounts, being alert, but all the problems can be a lot better if you pay attention.
Yeah, my piece of advice would just be having the dual authentications in place with when you're talking about funds going in and funds going out, having two people better than just having one person in charge.
Perfect. Well, and just to be respectful of everybody's time, if you do have questions, you can email those over to me and I can see if I can get some of them answered. But I really appreciate all of you joining us, and especially our panelists. Like I said, this is being recorded and we'll get the PowerPoint out to everybody, but I hope that you all have a great rest of the afternoon, and thank you again.
Thank you, Mary.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thanks everyone.